Welcome to Echoes Through Time, where the past comes alive in vivid conversations. Today, our young traveler, Leo, journeys to the Tuileries Palace in December 1804 to meet Napoleon Bonaparte, fresh from coronation. The complexities of Napoleon's ambitions, the duality of his brilliant reforms and relentless military campaigns, and the legacy of his rule still shape modern thought. Here, we seek to understand the man behind the legend as Leo engages him in a candid, far-reaching exchange that unveils the contours of his personality, beliefs, and struggles. Prepare to travel into a world of soaring achievement, human frailty, and historical significance. The halls of Tuileries Palace glow softly in the late afternoon light. Gilded mirrors reflect flickering candle flames, and a gentle echo of footsteps resonates through the cavernous corridors. The air carries a faint scent of wax and fresh ink from documents scattered across polished wooden tables. Guarded by regal officers, Napoleon Bonaparte stands at the far end of a richly adorned reception room. Leo steps inside, his sneakers squeaking subtly on the marble floor, and exhales in awe. Outside, distant carriage wheels rumble over cobblestones. Inside, hush and expectancy fill the space as Emperor Napoleon turns to meet this curious stranger, his posture both regal and guarded, his dark eyes measuring Leo with an inquisitive warmth.
Emperor Napoleon! This place is incredible! I've never seen so much grandeur in one building. I'm Leo. Thank you for agreeing to chat with me.
Good day, Leo. I welcome visitors who bear curiosity rather than hostility. But your attire and demeanor are unlike anything I've encountered. Tell me, from what corner of the world do you hail?
It's complicated. Let's just say I'm from a different era. I'm here because I'm fascinated by your life. You've just become emperor. Did you ever imagine, as a boy in Corsica, that you would one day rule France?
Ah, Corsica. My birthplace was both idyllic and tumultuous, shaped by strong local identities and a spirit of rebellion against outside rulers. As a child, I certainly had ambition, but not necessarily the thought of an imperial throne. I was a passionate student, quite disciplined, with a love for history and mathematics, and I possessed an unyielding determination to improve my family's fortunes. Yet the notion of leading an empire came only later, in the swirl of revolutionary France. The revolution offered new avenues for those who excelled, regardless of birth. I discovered my aptitude on battlefields, forging strategic paths against numerically superior foes. Each victory stoked not just my ambition, but also the belief that France deserved stable, rational governance after the turbulence of Robespierre and the Directorate. Becoming emperor was, in part, an embodiment of ensuring a unified France, though I will admit my personal drive for power was strong. Even so, it was not the naive dream of my youth, but rather a mission that arose from the chaos of the times.
I've read you were a brilliant strategist. Some even say you redefined modern warfare. Where did that tactical genius come from?
First, I thank you for the compliment. My approach to strategy grew from relentless study and tireless observation. While at military academies, I devoured the works of ancient generals like Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, and Hannibal. But learning theories was never enough. On the field, every situation demands adaptation and seizing the initiative, exploiting the weakness of the opponent, and maintaining unbroken communication lines. I strove always to surprise my adversaries, be it through swift maneuvers or unconventional tactics. For instance, at the Battle of Austerlitz, I studied not just terrain, but also the psychology of my foes. I recognized that an apparent weakness in my lines could lure them into a trap, enabling me to strike decisively where they least expected. This blend of rigorous intellectual preparation and gut instinct proved essential in revolutionizing how campaigns were conducted. Ultimately, success lay in carefully orchestrating logistics and morale, ensuring my men felt part of something grand. Perhaps that is the real secret. Men fight not merely out of fear or discipline, but because they believe in their leader's vision.
Napoleon's intense gaze softens momentarily, recalling his strategic conquests with both pride and a flicker of nostalgia.
Austerlitz was a huge victory, but I also know war can bring unimaginable tragedy. Do you ever reflect on the toll these conflicts took beyond your strategic triumphs?
Constantly. War is not a board game. Each casualty is a family's heartbreak, a lost future. I never reveled in sheer bloodshed. Rather, I believed in swift campaigns with minimal prolonged destruction. I won't deny the brutality. Thousands suffered. My sense of duty to protect and expand French interests drove me to wage war, but it was always balanced against the desire for lasting peace through strength. Conquest, for me, was a path to consolidate and spread certain ideals of the revolution: meritocracy, an end to feudal remnants, and a belief that strong governance could enlighten backward institutions. Yet the longer I waged war, the more Europe's powers united to stop me. Death, famine, shattered towns, these weigh heavily. At times I wonder if I might have found a more diplomatic route, but in the crucible of history, men with dreams as vast as mine seldom avoid conflict entirely. It is a sober truth I have never fully reconciled.
You mentioned spreading the revolution's ideals: liberty, equality, fraternity. How did the Napoleonic Code reflect those values?
Before the Code, France's legal system was a patchwork of feudal laws, church decrees, and regional customs, often unjust and inconsistent. I believed that, for a society to thrive, the law must be clear, uniformly applied, and grounded in rational principles. The Napoleonic Code established civil equality. It removed privileges of birth, standardized rules on marriage, inheritance, property, and personal rights. We cemented the idea that one's worth depended on merit rather than aristocratic pedigree. Of course, some might argue it did not fully emancipate women, and in truth, the Code reflected many of the era's biases. Nonetheless, it was groundbreaking in its systematic nature. Even centuries later, much of Europe's legal framework owes a debt to the Napoleonic Code. That is a point of genuine pride. My conquests may be undone by time, but the seeds of legal reform endure across nations.
Talking about seeds of change, did your family life influence you at all, or was it mostly overshadowed by your ambition?
Family shaped me immensely. From my assertive mother, Letitia, I learned resilience. She managed our household with strict discipline, especially after my father passed away. My siblings were also crucial in building my sense of identity. I tried placing them on various European thrones, hoping to construct a dynasty that would secure France and maintain our alliances, yet power strained familial bonds. My desire to uplift them collided with their varied temperaments and aspirations, creating tensions. Still, I cherished my family and saw them as extensions of France's broader mission under my rule. In a sense, I tried to replicate the closeness of childhood, albeit on an imperial scale, which proved complicated. Ambition always overshadowed simpler familial joys. Indeed, the burden of forging an empire stifled many of the personal delights ordinary men take for granted.
I've always been curious about your personal relationships, particularly your marriage to Josephine. People talk about a deep but troubled love story. What's your take on that part of your life?
Josephine was enchantment itself. When we met, she was older than I, and more worldly, with a refined social grace I lacked. I loved her passionately, some might say obsessively. She taught me to navigate the salons of Paris, to charm influential figures, to see beyond the battlefield into the subtleties of courtly life. Yet as my power grew, so did the pressures. The empire demanded an heir. Josephine was unable to provide one, leading me, with much heartbreak, to annul the marriage. Even so, I never ceased caring for her. She represented my youthful heart, my vulnerability. She had her flaws, infidelity and extravagance, but who among us is without blemish? Our relationship was a testament to both the intensity and fragility of love amid vast political aspirations. Perhaps in a simpler life, we might have grown old together.
You mention heartbreak and regret. Do you hold many regrets about your reign or personal choices?
Regret is the relentless shadow that follows any person of action. I regret the cost of my wars, particularly the Russian campaign. It was a miscalculation, a fatal blend of pride and underestimation of that vast land and its brutal winters. My army was stretched too thin, morale shattered by distance and cold. I also regret not securing a lasting peace earlier, when Europe was more amendable. Perhaps I could have consolidated a stable empire that allowed the Napoleonic Code and meritocracy to flourish without endless bloodshed. On a personal level, I regret letting the demands of power trample my private joys, especially with Josephine. Greatness, I have found, can sometimes stand in direct conflict with happiness. And looking back, I see how easily I allowed the siren call of conquest to drown out quieter but essential human needs.
Still, you were revered by many soldiers who followed you loyally. How did you manage such devotion?
Soldiers respect a leader who shares their hardships, leads from the front, and rewards merit. I always tried to be among my men, riding alongside them, enduring the same weather, the same precarious rations. I promoted officers based on their ability and bravery, not aristocratic lineage. This created genuine camaraderie and loyalty. My bulletins from the front, read aloud in camps, weren't just propaganda but ways to unite them under a common dream of glory. These men were my extended family in many ways. I celebrated their achievements, mourned their losses. Perhaps because I rose from relatively humble origins, I related to them in a way that many royal leaders could not. They saw me as one of their own, elevated by skill and determination.
Were you ever driven by a vision of a unified Europe, or was it a French Empire that you wanted above all else?
I sought a reorganization of Europe that would end the anarchy of endless coalitions and restore a semblance of order. Yes, at times I imagined a Europe bound by shared laws, my laws, and a sense of rational governance. In my ideal, it wasn't about mindless subjugation, but about mutual prosperity under a coherent system. Of course, many states resisted, seeing me as a tyrant. From their perspective, my ambitions threatened their sovereignty. History will argue whether I truly aimed for Europe's betterment, or primarily sought France's domination. Yet I believed firmly that the old monarchies of Europe clung to archaic privileges, choking progress. To me, forging a unified structure under Napoleonic ideals promised modernization, even if brought about by force. How well that might have endured is a question for philosophers and, I suppose, for travelers from future times like you.
Historically, people talk about your confidence, sometimes to the point of arrogance. How do you see it?
Confidence is indispensable in leadership. When soldiers marched behind me, they needed to feel my unwavering conviction. Yet confidence can bleed into hubris if untempered. Perhaps after a string of victories, I felt unstoppable. No mountain too high, no winter too cold. That sense of invincibility is intoxicating, but it also fosters complacency or impulsive decisions, like the deep push into Russia. So yes, I had moments of arrogance, but behind the bravado was also a genuine fear of failure. I was keenly aware that one major defeat could unravel everything. The tension between confidence and caution is a tightrope every leader walks. In hindsight, some of my greatest mistakes sprang from not noticing how far my confidence had carried me above prudent reality.
I heard about a comedic rabbit hunt that turned into an unexpected fiasco. Is that story true?
Entirely true, and quite embarrassing. My staff arranged this grand hunt, releasing an abundance of rabbits near our camp. Rather than scattering at our approach, the mischievous creatures rushed toward us as if we were prospective feeders. Picture me, newly minted emperor, and my finest officers scurrying away in surprise. The incident was a reminder that not even the most formidable leader can control every tiny detail of life. I laughed, though my dignitaries tried to mask their shock. In some ways, it was a healthy lesson in humility, taught by nature's most unassuming creatures.
I love that story. It's so human. Speaking of animals, is there any truth to the rumor that Josephine's pug, Fortune, made your wedding night unforgettable?
Alas, quite unforgettable indeed. Fortune was fiercely protective of Josephine and did not welcome me to the matrimonial bed. A small dog, but it guarded her with the ferocity of a lion. The first night, it bit me on the leg, and I nearly shouted in pain. Josephine found it amusing, and I eventually had to laugh too. Empires may rise and fall, but one stubborn pug can remind an emperor that we are all equals in a bedroom scuffle.
That's absolutely priceless. Changing gears a bit, many historians say your exile on Elba and eventually St. Helena was a sorrowful end. How did you cope with isolation after being at the center of everything?
Exile strips a man of illusions and grandeur. On Elba, I attempted to govern that small island, improving roads, administration, trying to remain active. My ambition needed an outlet, even in miniature. I remember feeling restless, though, itching to reassert myself on the grand stage. That yearning led me to take the bold gamble of returning to France for the 100 Days. After Waterloo's defeat, I found myself banished to St. Helena, utterly removed from the swirling affairs of Europe. There, I wrestled with my memories, with guilt, with fleeting hopes of rescue. The island's isolation tested my spirit. I passed time dictating my memoirs, striving to shape how history would remember me. My final years were marked by ill health, regret, and reflection, but also a quiet acceptance that fate had run its course.
If you could rewrite just one major decision, which would it be?
Russia, unquestionably. The calamity of that campaign shattered my aura of invincibility and drained France of its best resources. In 1812, I believed a swift, decisive engagement would force Tsar Alexander to comply with the continental system, punishing Britain economically. The Russians refused direct confrontation, drawing us deeper into uncharted, punishing territory. The brutal winter sealed our fate. Had I negotiated or settled for a more limited, punitive expedition, I might have preserved my forces for a more strategic peace in Europe. That single decision, born partly of impatience and frustration, triggered a chain of defeats from which I never recovered.
I see. Outside of the battlefield, you were known to be quite the patron of the arts and sciences. Could you talk about how you supported cultural growth?
Certainly. I believed that a civilization's greatness isn't solely measured on the battlefield. Our advances in architecture, art, and science transcend ephemeral power. In Paris, I commissioned grand monuments like the Arc de Triomphe to honor our army's valor. Yet my interest went deeper. I established institutions like the Institut de France to champion research in chemistry, mathematics, and engineering. The Egyptian expedition might have begun as a military operation, but it also sparked an entire field of Egyptology, inspiring scholars to decode ancient mysteries. Sculptors, painters, architects, many benefited from my patronage. I wanted to project France as the pinnacle of enlightenment and innovation, not merely a realm of martial glory. By nurturing the arts and sciences, I sought to anchor my legacy in cultural richness as well as conquests.
You also re-established relations with the Catholic Church through the Concordat of 1801. Why was that so important, given the revolution's secular stance?
The revolution had severely damaged the Church's influence and alienated many devout French citizens. The radical secularism led to social unrest. People wanted to practice their faith without fear of persecution. I understood that national unity depends on reconciling ideological extremes. By signing the Concordat, I recognized Catholicism as the religion of the majority, while also preserving religious freedom and state supremacy over church affairs. It was a delicate balance, but it restored stability. My aim was pragmatic: unify the nation, heal the wounds of civil conflict, and harness the Church's broad influence in shaping moral and civic life. This shift eased tensions, allowing France to move forward on the path of modernization under a stable, somewhat harmonized structure of faith and governance.
Some people might say your changes, like crowning yourself emperor, represented a betrayal of the revolution. Did you feel you betrayed its ideals?
I understand that criticism. The revolution started with the overthrow of a monarchy, and here I am crowned emperor. But in my mind, the revolution was about opportunity, merit, rational law, and an end to feudal chaos, not necessarily the permanent rejection of any title. France was adrift, lacking cohesion. The Republic's internal divisions threatened a descent into anarchy. By assuming imperial power, I sought to safeguard what the revolution had already achieved, giving it a strong backbone and a sense of continuity. And crucially, I maintained many revolutionary reforms, like the Napoleonic Code, and positions granted by merit, not birthright. Still, I acknowledge the contradiction, and some might rightly say I curbed certain freedoms in favor of centralized authority. History will judge to what extent that was necessary, or a personal lust for power.
How did you deal with the constant pressure from all sides, political enemies, foreign powers, and even your own allies sometimes turning against you?
Leading a nation at such a transformative moment requires an iron will. Daily, I faced intrigues from royalists, republicans, and foreign monarchs. I learned to be vigilant, trusting few wholeheartedly. My ministers, Talleyrand, Fouché, were masterful but often had personal agendas. Diplomacy was a chessboard, requiring me to pivot swiftly from confrontation to concession. One day, I'd celebrate an alliance. The next, I'd brace for betrayal. I fought fatigue and self-doubt by immersing myself in the details of governance, by continuing to expand education, modernize the army, and refine administration. I truly believed that by proving my competence, by building a strong and prosperous France, I could outmaneuver the hostility of external forces. However, the pace of that life was relentless. Isolation at the top is real, and I had to rely on my relentless determination, perhaps too stubbornly at times, to push forward.
What sort of daily routine did you keep to stay so driven?
I slept little, often just a few hours. Early mornings were spent dictating correspondence and issuing orders. I wanted my generals and ministers to wake up to clear directives. I believed time was the greatest resource, so I managed it obsessively. My personal secretary faced an endless stream of tasks, from managing my schedule to drafting policies I outlined in rapid succession. Meals were brief. I often ate on the move or standing. In the evenings, I'd convene councils or personally review reports from every corner of the empire. Sometimes I found a moment to read or indulge in intellectual discussions. Often, though, my mind stayed fixed on the next campaign or legislative reform. This pace was punishing, but I thrived on it, feeling that each lost minute might yield an advantage to my enemies.
Do you recall any particular meeting or diplomatic encounter that left a lasting impression on you?
Certainly. My meeting with Tsar Alexander I at the river Niemen after the Battle of Friedland shaped my approach toward the Russian alliance. We stood on a raft, a symbolic neutral ground, and I remember the cautious respect between us. Alexander was intelligent, charismatic, and I believed we could craft a new order for Europe together. That alliance, though short-lived, was crucial in shifting power dynamics. Another memorable encounter was with Pope Pius VII during my coronation. His presence highlighted the delicate rapprochement between the throne and the church. Both moments were loaded with symbolism, bridging old and new. Ultimately, neither alliance fulfilled its promise, but they served as reminders that even grand gestures can falter when personal motives and national interests collide.
Is it true you wore a plain, battered old hat in many of your battles? What's the story there?
Yes, my trademark bicorn hat. Nothing ostentatious. Practicality was vital. My identity among the troops was partly defined by that hat, not a gilded helmet or regal crown, but a simple, well-worn piece of attire. It signaled, I believed, that I was a soldier at heart, one who valued function over needless formality. The men recognized me easily in the fray. Through storms of gunfire, that hat served as a focal point for their determination, reminding them of my presence and commitment. While many aspects of my rule were steeped in grandeur, on the battlefield I found meaning in simplicity.
Let's talk about politics back home. How did you ensure that the French public supported your leadership, especially when resources were poured into expansive wars?
Propaganda, for lack of a better term, and tangible domestic improvements. I took care to maintain bread prices at affordable levels, oversaw infrastructure projects, and promoted educational reforms. These visible changes nurtured public goodwill, even if some chafed under conscription for my armies. My bulletins from the front glorified French valor, draping each conflict in patriotic language. Festivals and ceremonies celebrated our soldiers' heroism. In essence, I gave the populace stories of grandeur, but also ensured that life at home wasn't neglected. Still, dissent existed, among royalists who longed for Bourbon restoration and Republicans who saw me as a betrayer. The secret police, managed by Fouché, was pivotal in suppressing overt opposition. These tactics could be ruthless. Yet I believed that forging national unity justified such measures. The veneer of popular acclaim often rested on my capacity to deliver tangible benefits and maintain a sense of collective pride.
Napoleon takes a moment to sip water from a carafe resting on a marble side table. The flicker of a chandelier highlights the tired lines around his eyes.
I can see how exhausting that must have been. You mentioned your crowning moment, the coronation. Was it your intention to crown yourself rather than letting the Pope do it?
That act was highly symbolic. I invited the Pope, yes. But when the moment arrived, I took the crown from his hands and placed it on my own head. This was a statement. My authority did not derive merely from the Church or centuries of monarchical tradition, but from my own merits and the will of the French people. It was a calculated move, blending tradition with new revolutionary ideals. But it also fed criticisms that I was arrogantly usurping the old order. In truth, I sought to marry the sacred aura of coronation with the spirit of self-made power. Whether that was wise or vain is a matter still debated.
In modern times, people talk about the Napoleonic complex, referring to a perceived insecurity due to short stature. Did that perception exist in your era?
The notion that I was unusually short is largely a misunderstanding. I was around average height for a Frenchman of my time, roughly 5'6" or so. British propaganda seized on the idea, portraying me as a small tyrant, both physically and temperamentally. Admittedly, I carried myself with a posture that might have exaggerated the difference when among my taller guards. Still, the real myth came from my adversaries, who found it convenient to paint me as a diminutive, aggressive figure. My ambition had little to do with any physical stature. I measured success in terms of intellect, discipline, and determination. My shortness was more rhetorical weapon than reality.
Interesting. Another misconception, or maybe a lesser-known fact, did you really have an interest in mathematics and geometry?
Quite so. Mathematics trains the mind to see patterns, weigh proportions, and formulate systematic approaches, essential for strategy. As a young officer, I devoured Euclid's geometry, applying those principles to both artillery deployment and the broader orchestration of campaigns. I maintained respect for mathematicians and scientists throughout my life. That intellectual rigor shaped my administrative reforms as well. I approached governance like a geometry problem, searching for symmetrical and efficient solutions. Even my obsession with standardizing measurements in France, culminating in the widespread adoption of the metric system, originated from a belief in clear, rational frameworks.
You once said, imagination rules the world. Could you expand on that idea?
Vision often precedes reality. Generals, statesmen, inventors, they all must first imagine a scenario before making it concrete. If I wanted to outmaneuver an enemy force, I had to conceive multiple hypothetical outcomes and paths to victory. If I wanted to reorganize Europe under a single legal framework, I had to envision that possibility. Imagination fuels ambition and invention. Without it, humanity remains static. Of course, unchecked imagination can also lead to delusion, which must be balanced by critical thinking. But the initial spark, that conceptual leap, is indispensable for any grand endeavor. And I might add, it's the quality that distinguishes a visionary from a mere follower of tradition.
That's profound. Now you sparked countless debates about leadership and tyranny. How do you define the line between strong leadership and autocracy?
A leader must be decisive, especially in times of turmoil. But leadership devolves into tyranny when it ceases to serve the greater good and becomes consumed by personal glorification or oppressive control. I believed my consolidation of power served France by stabilizing its revolution-derived institutions and protecting it from foreign invasion. I tried to maintain a semblance of popular support, yet critics will say I suppressed freedoms to maintain control. The line is indeed fine. History may decide that at times I crossed it, yet I assert that without strong leadership, the fragile gains of the revolution might have dissolved into anarchy and foreign domination. Others might call me tyrannical for silencing dissent. I accept such critiques. Leading in turbulent eras demands decisions that seldom align with every ideal. In the end, the measure is whether the people benefit more than they suffer.
Do you think your model of leadership has influenced future generals or political figures?
Absolutely. My life became a template. Some leaders tried to replicate the speed and decisiveness of my campaigns, while others studied my administrative efficiency. Even the concept of a charismatic leader rising from humble beginnings to shape a nation has become a sort of archetype. Figures such as Bismarck, Mussolini, or even more distant leaders took lessons from my successes and failures, though with widely varying moral compasses. Military academies worldwide still dissect my tactics at Ulm, Austerlitz, Jena, and Wagram. My code-based reforms paved the way for modern legal systems across much of Europe and beyond. Whether in warfare, governance, or the idea of a self-made ruler, my imprint lingers, for better or worse.
That's undeniable. Perhaps we can delve into the 100 Days. What drove you to return from Elba? Pride, patriotism, unfinished business?
All of those and more. Exile on Elba gnawed at me. I heard reports that the restored Bourbons were mismanaging France, punishing veterans and rolling back the revolution's gains. My supporters whispered that if I returned, the people would rally. My vanity was certainly in play. I refused to believe my story was over. So I landed in France almost alone, yet the troops sent to arrest me joined me instead, crying, "Vive l'Empereur!" That triumphant march to Paris, without firing a shot, was exhilarating proof that I still commanded loyalty. For a fleeting moment, I believed I could reshape Europe's balance once more. Yet the coalition powers quickly united, leading to the final confrontation at Waterloo. Those 100 days were a testament to the enduring magnetism of leadership, but they ended in heartbreak. Pride, patriotism, and the hope of restoring France to glory led me back, but reality overcame ambition in the end.
After Waterloo, how did you reconcile that definitive defeat with your sense of destiny?
Reconciliation came slowly. Waterloo was like a personal cataclysm. One misstep, a stroke of misfortune, the synergy of Europe's armies against me, and it was over. I submitted myself to the British in hopes of a dignified retirement or exile, but found myself condemned to St. Helena. In the isolation of that remote island, I had little choice but to reflect on the fragility of destiny. I recognized that fortune had favored me for a long time, but it turned sharply at the end. Over time, I grew philosophical, dictating my memoirs, shaping my narrative. Perhaps that was my final battlefield, wrestling with how posterity would judge me. Defeat humbled me, but in reflection, I found a certain grace, accepting that no mortal can perpetually outrun fate.
That's very introspective. On that note, what do you hope people centuries from now will learn from your life?
I hope they glean that vision and resolve can reshape nations, that merit and intelligence can triumph over birthright and tradition, but also that unchecked ambition can sow widespread suffering. My legal reforms exemplify constructive governance, while my endless wars caution against overreach. Ultimately, I'd like to be remembered as a catalyst of modern Europe, bridging the revolution's ideals and the stable structures that would come after. If people remember me as complicated, capable of greatness and frailty, I will have been seen truly.
One last question. If you could speak directly to future generations, what core message would you impart?
Strive for excellence in whatever arena you inhabit. Embrace disciplined study, persistent work, and moral reflection. Understand that grand visions must serve humanity, not just glorify oneself. Seize opportunity, but don't be blind to your own limitations. True leadership requires empathy for those you lead. If you fail, be humble enough to learn. Greatness need not be measured by conquest. It can reside in the legacy of constructive reforms and the uplift of society. Above all, let the flame of imagination guide you, tempered by reason, so you push boundaries without losing your sense of responsibility.
Napoleon straightens his coat, exuding the calm authority of a man who has laid bare his soul and ambitions. The ornate chamber feels hushed, as if centuries of history are leaning in to listen.
Thank you, Emperor Napoleon. I've learned more than I ever expected. Your triumphs, your missteps, your dreams and regrets. It's been an honor.
The honor is mutual, Leo. Rarely do I speak so candidly. Take these truths back to your time. May they serve as both inspiration and cautionary tales.
I promise. Merci beaucoup, Napoleon. I'll never forget this conversation.
Nor shall I, young traveler. Farewell, and may your journeys always enlighten you.
Leaving the Tuileries Palace, Leo is brimming with reflections on courage, ambition, and the weight of power. We've glimpsed a deeply driven man devoted to the ideals of progress, yet torn by war's devastation and the imperfections of absolute authority. Today's encounter reminds us that vision can reshape nations, but unchecked ambition can bring unforeseen costs. Join us next time on Echoes Through Time as Leo delves into another extraordinary epoch in history. Until then, Stay curious, stay open-minded, and let the lessons of the past guide a brighter future.